You're listening to Head, a Star Wars podcast. Two fans, two generations, all things Star Wars begins now.
All right. Well, hello, everybody. I'm Eric Vansel.
I'm Daryl Sanders.
And we're your hosts for this show. So, as you guys probably have noticed, well, you may not have noticed, really, because I'm really, other than the fact of us not taking chats, you wouldn't notice that we're not actually live, other than the fact that this is a YouTube premiere. So, hopefully one of us or both of us or whatever can chat tomorrow, but, you know, it's almost like sometimes depending on where we're at, we might be able to, but, you know, you can almost make the argument that if you can chat, you can do it live. So hopefully one of us will actually be able to come on. But this one's going to be somewhat of an interesting show because this is one of the things that I have been wondering and I have been hoping that would happen for a while. Now, I do have to say, I'm kind of shocked. Well, I am and I'm not, but I'm a little shocked that it's the Acolyte that is really the first show that might be doing this. And that is drawing inspiration, like direct inspiration, I'm talking about, from the expanded universe. Because, again, I mean, look, even as far back as the prequel trilogy, we're not so much Phantom Menace, but starting with Attack of the Clones, with the, with some of the stuff that they had in there all the way on through. Even Lucas himself actually drew some inspiration. Maybe not so much inspiration, but more like giving fan service, right? So just basically, doing things like including Quinlan Voss, a mention of him, and I think Revenge of the Sith. That could have been clones. Nah, it's probably Sith. But the thing is, they would put stuff in there like that, like Coruscant. Actually, that's one of the earliest examples that we get, even in the Phantom Menace, because Coruscant was actually an invention of Timothy Zahn. That is what Timothy Zahn called the home world for the Republic, basically, like kind of the Republic capital. Forgot what Lucas actually, he had a name for it early on that might have been in something like, Splinter of the Mind's Eye or something. Like the authors that were doing those stories, kind of pre-Timothy Zahn, pre-expanded universe, more like expanded stories during the time of the making of the original trilogy. But this announcement that Leslye Headland is drawing direct inspiration from the expanded universe for the Acolyte is somewhat, I think, of a huge thing, because even though, again, I mean, even Obi-Wan, the Obi-Wan series has brought in some things from the expanded universe. But again, that's just more like little bits and pieces here that people might bring in just either for fan service, or maybe there's some cool thing that they thought, hey, you know what, let's make this canon. But this to me, and I want to get your thoughts on this, this to me actually indicates something bigger. It indicates that, no, we're going to actually go to the expanded universe, maybe for entire story chunks, or really just, instead of, okay, we have a story, let's cherry pick from the expanded universe and put stuff in. It's like, no, we're going to actually frame this thing around a lot of the concepts and storylines and everything that's in the expanded universe. So what do you think about all that?
Yeah, I mean, I'm really excited. I mean, that's one of the things. That's why when I saw this article, I shot it over to you, like, as fast as my fingers could get it to you, just because I know that, one, I know you have such a love for the expanded universe, number one, but two, one of the big things that, we've often talked about, pretty much on every show that, we review or something, whether it's Mandalorian or Book of Boba Fett, now Obi-Wan, or whatever other show we might watch, or movie. The biggest thing is always the story. We always keep harking back to that. And that's one of the things, unfortunately, that has been severely lacking in Star Wars, is really good storytelling. And whether it's dialogue, whether it's they're rushing something, or they're not giving us, uh, or they're not utilizing the time or the characters that they have, or whatever the case may be. That's really, like, to me, the biggest problem right now in Star Wars. So to see that someone like Leslye Headland, who is in her own right like an uber Star Wars fan. I mean, like, this woman really, really loves Star Wars. I mean, she actually came to Star Wars with the idea of the Acolyte. And her whole
Mm-hmm.
concept was just basically like, if we want to still tell Star Wars from the perspective of the bad guys, you have to kind of tell it from the perspective of when they were kind of like the underdogs. And I love that. I love the fact that, well, number one, that she's actually telling the perspective from the bad guys, or the Sith, in this regard. And so this is something that I've been really wanting to see for a long time, because like I said, we've always heard all the stories of the Jedi, and you know, the lore behind them, but we've never really heard a whole lot about the Sith. We just kind of knew that they were around, and there's the whole rule of two, but you really didn't get a chance to see their inner workings and what they struggle with and what they were trying to deal with. So that's what the Acolyte kind of is going for. And it takes place like 100 years, before the events of the Phantom Menace. And so the fact that we're here, this is the frame or the setup going into the expanded universe to get either chunks or stories out of that is great, because we just brought this up on our other show, was that, like, you got all these great books out here, you got all this great content and material, just go do that. Like, it's there, use it. And I think it's been such a waste that, of course, everybody's trying to reinvent the wheel when you have so many things that haven't even been touched.
Yeah,
And
well, no, you're right. And I mean, again, so the Acolyte has been described by some as a detective novel, like a detective thriller type of a thing. I mean, there's all these different
yeah.
elements that have come out about what the Acolyte actually is. And of course, it's going to lend itself, I think, to this whole thing. And I mean, the first thing that, if you're talking about the expanded universe and everything as it relates to the Acolyte, this is what's really going to be strange to me. Because first of all, you wouldn't even have to go to the expanded universe, because as we know, everything that's happening in Star Wars right now, at least in theory anyway, is all canonical, right? So everything that
Hmm.
Disney does, all their books, all their whatever the case may be, it's all canon, it all counts. So during this time, right, 100 years ago, I mean, we're kind of toward the tail end here of the High Republic. So to me, this whole thing would just scream, well, let's bring in the High Republic. What's interesting about this,
Hmm.
though, is that the High Republic is not really part of the expanded universe. They could have said the expanded stories, or we're going to go, but no, and there's a quote that I can actually read here from her, Leslye herself, which says, "I approach this as a fan who is much more into the RPGs that fuel the expanded universe." So that right there
Hmm.
is telling me some of the video games and things like that, probably Knights of the Old Republic. That would be my
Hmm.
guess.
Yeah,
Now,
definitely.
obviously that happened way before all this stuff. But she goes on to say, "I know the timeline very well," which that's encouraging. "And I thought, if you
Yes.
want to explore Star Wars from the perspective of the bad guys," which goes into what you were saying, "the best time to do it is when the bad guys were vastly outnumbered," which, of course, was during that era. And Lucasfilm president Kathleen Kennedy also confirmed that the series will draw on the old expanded universe, saying, "What's great about Leslye is that she knows it all. I mean, she's read a million books in the expanded universe, drawing on something that no one has yet explored in on-screen storytelling." And this right here, and this is one of the reasons why, when you did send me this, because
Hmm.
again, this is something that came out of nowhere. I remember a couple of days ago, because we had just done our episode 5 review of Obi-Wan, and we knew we were going to have to pre-record the show for tonight. It's like, okay, well, guess what? We better find something really quick. And then you just, kind of slid this in. And it's just like, whoa, this is huge, because I
Hmm.
remember Leslye saying that, that it's like, oh yeah, I'm she's like really, really well versed in the expanded
Yeah.
universe.
And I think that's what's great, because I think that's what's going to give a lot of fans what they want to see, or things that we would, and then people who aren't as familiar with the expanded universe, I think it's going to reawaken Star Wars for them. It's taken, like I said, this the whole concept of it all is the perspective. The perspective gives it a completely different story. No different than The Mandalorian. The Mandalorian is a great one because, okay, well, what happened after the Empire fell? Like,
Mm-hmm.
and we're not telling it from the eyes of a Jedi. We're not talking about from, you know, some clone trooper or whatever. Like, this is just a guy who's like kind of making his way through the galaxy, but you're getting to see remnants of things that we know what will happen. Okay, the Battle of Endor. We're seeing, like stormtrooper helmets on, punchy sticks, and it's just like, okay, like you really kind of understand where we are, but they're telling this whole kind of brand new story, but they're still kind of going back to, we got things like the Dark Saber, right? Most people, if you're just a kind of casual fan, you don't even know about the Dark Saber. But for us, those of us who watch the Clone Wars and Rebels and things like that,
Yeah.
like when we saw that, like, man, I mean, we
Oh,
ignited like
man.
crazy.
I mean, well, first of all, what was
We're just
funny about that was, and I remember we talked about this even during our review, right? Where I remember very plainly saying, wait, is that the Dark Saber? Because that kind of looks like the Dark Saber. Like, I mean, at
yeah.
first it was almost this denial. Like, I thought that maybe they wanted to give Moff Gideon some sort of a unique weapon or something. And I
hmm
swear, man, my first thought was, oh man, you know what? They kind of modeled that after the Dark Saber. But then I'm kind of like, wait a minute, I think that might be
That
the
is
Dark Saber. And then of course it's like,
yeah.
oh no way. And then of course, it goes into what I'm sure every fan that had seen it started thinking. It's, well, okay, how did he get it? I mean, when
hmm
last we left this thing, it was definitely not in the hands of a Moff. So, yeah, you're right. I mean, to the casual fan, this wasn't as big of a deal, but and again, that kind of goes into what you and I have always talked about, where they need to start making Star Wars for the real hardcore fans. They need to stop with
hmm
this Marvel movie mentality of, okay, we're gonna pretty much create this thing that's based on some of the comic stuff, so the hardcore fans will understand. They will recognize, say, the Infinity War storyline. But
hmm
by and large, these movies are essentially made for a casual fan, because what they did with the Marvel Cinematic Universe, and you could do this, and I suppose if Star Wars had maybe not started out in the film medium, if it was just books,
hmm
like a Lord of the Rings kind of thing, and
hmm
had it been around as long as a lot of the Marvel comics have, you probably could have taken the same approach, which is, okay, we're going to take inspiration from a lot of the comics, and then of course, be fairly true to the origin stories of the characters themselves. But we're going to sort of create our own entity that will exist parallel to the comics. It'll draw some inspiration, but it's not going to be a complete adaptation. Whereas with Star Wars, you can't really do that. And so I think that what they really need to start doing is, you know what? There's a lot of fans that have been around for 20 plus years. The franchise is like 40 some years old now. 45
hmm
actually, to be exact. So you need to start making Star Wars. Stop trying to appeal to people that might come in for like 10 minutes and move on to the next fad. Start making it for the real fans like you and I.
Yeah, yeah. Reward your people who've been around you for, that, and that's the thing. It's like even at work, right? You want to reward those people who've been around with you, who stayed loyal,
Mm-hmm.
good times, bad times. They've been there. They kept coming to celebration. They're coming. They're buying up all the merch, and they're like, these are people who really are deeply invested in this franchise. And I think, yeah, that those fans deserve, and including us, good stories. And like I said, these stories have already been laid out. They've have some great, have a lot of meat on them. And yeah, you can utilize that to tell a lot of different things. And that could even expand what we already know from the prequel, now the prequel trilogy to the original and sequel, because in this you can start talking about Darth Plagueis. You can start showing stuff about
Right.
Palpatine,
Right.
or you could just start mentioning things, like you could enrich these characters that we've already known, but they in the timeline
It'll
won't
kick
come
off
till
like a
later.
it's like a prequel trilogy or something.
Yeah.
But I mean, well, and the thing is that there's so many different things that we can say about it, and we will tonight. But so let's start by just laying this out. Another thing that you'll love is that she also talked about the many influences that she drew not only from Star Wars but also old martial arts films. She
Yeah.
says, I actually leaned more toward martial arts films and storylines that were a little more personal and less global and galactic. These warriors were on missions that were deeply personal. Wuxia and martial arts films from King Hu and Shaw Brothers, such as Drink With Me and A Touch of Zen. They are monks who are also martial arts heroes. It's common knowledge, of course, that Star Wars itself is actually,
Hmm.
the what's a guy named Akira something, Akira Kura something. I don't know. I blanked. Maybe hold on. It might be in
I
this
know.
article. Yeah, here it is. Akira Kurosawa. Say that 3 times fast. Again, the old samurai films, things like that.
Yeah.
Star Wars was already influenced by that stuff.
Sure. I mean, the whole concept of the Jedi is basically like Bushido. Like, it's that whole
Mm-hmm.
samurai warrior mentality. Like, okay, you have to be selfless. You have to, like, there's an honor and a code system that goes along with, the whole samurai stuff. Whereas the Sith kind of follow the more ninja system, where they're more like, okay, they kind of have a different vibe to. They don't necessarily follow this whole honor code. They just do whatever needs to be done, as Palpatine would say, to get the job done. And a lot of times you have to be kind of ruthless, on the ninja side of things. So yeah, I mean, there's a lot. I mean, if you just want to take it at its, very, very basic levels, but then when you start looking at these movies and these stories, yeah, they're always been very personal. I mean, even if you look at some of these other things where Five Deadly Venoms, if you looked at some of the old Bruce Lee stuff, Jackie Chan, they're always like, okay, my master taught me this, or you stole something from, our dojo or something like that, and now I'm going on this quest to retrieve it, or I'm going on this path of enlightenment, or whatever the case may be. There's always some very personal journey that they have to overcome. And I think that's once again another great storytelling device,
Mm-hmm.
is that finding yourself, that like trying to figure out who you are. And we see that with Luke Skywalker, right? So all these different things, are great. And like I said, the fact that I'm just really happy that Leslye, really, it seems like she's keyed in on those things that we've talked about when Dave Filoni was talking about, like, what is Star Wars really? What goes into it, and she's drawing from that. But then she's also drawing from things that's like, what? Like I said, these are great stories. These are great plot points. These are great things, and we can utilize this because it's here. It's already here. Fans already love it. Reward them.
Well, and there's a difference too between the guy, um it wasn't Lawrence Kasdan's kid, but it was one of the co-writers of the Rise of Skywalker, I think, that was actually extremely well versed in the expanded universe. And so
Hmm.
obviously that helped with some of the references and things like that. I mean, granted, I don't want to go on too big of a thing with the Rise of Skywalker because I know there were issues. There's issues with the pacing. There's a
Hmm.
lot of there's almost as many problems with the Rise of Skywalker as there are good things about it. It's kind of a half and half thing.
Sure.
But
Yeah.
the point being, though, that somebody like that guy, somebody like Filoni and Favreau, both are fairly well versed in the expanded universe, and it's nice now that we're getting another showrunner, another creator who wasn't just simply a Star Wars fan as far as, hey, I grew up with the movies, I really loved them, I couldn't wait to do a Star Wars film, that kind of thing. No, this is a person who's really invested. I mean, when you start reading all the novels that were out there, particularly the old expanded universe, right? What's now Legends. I mean, that was, and again, some of the questions tonight. I mean, I get it. I know that you haven't particularly. You've probably read more from the current canon than the expanded universe.
Yeah, I mean, I caught some of the older stuff. At the time as a kid, I really didn't even know that there were a whole lot of. I don't know. I mean, this may sound crazy. I didn't even know they were like still making Star Wars books or anything at that time. When I was
They
a kid,
weren't, because when you were a kid, actually, because you got into it like what, in the mid '90s or something. When did?
Yeah, I probably. Well, I mean, yeah, I got into it like early '90s. Probably like literally like 90, 91 when I first kind of got really exposed to Star Wars. But like I
Right.
really didn't start. But I didn't know. I didn't as far as like the books or anything. Like
Well,
I
that's
didn't
what
even
I'm
know.
saying. The books didn't even really. Yes, you had two books that were released during the making of the original trilogy. One of them was Splinter of the Mind's Eye, which actually was written, I later found out, as a possible sequel to the original Star Wars, because it does fall between A New Hope and Empire Strikes Back. But the idea
Yeah, I heard
was
about.
Lucas allowed, I forgot the guy's name that wrote it, but the guy that wrote it based on another script that Lucas actually wrote. So just in case he didn't have a lot of money and he had to do like a low budget sequel, he could have pulled it off with the storyline. So it, in a way, it could have been the low budget version of The Empire Strikes Back, although technically it's a story that falls in between the two. But really, and this is the point, you wouldn't have necessarily known, because the first expanded universe novels that came out, obviously it was the Thrawn trilogy, the Heir to the Empire, Dark Force Rising and Last Command. That trilogy, Heir to the Empire came out in 91. So the first expanded universe book came out when you were just getting into Star Wars, and you're still in the single digits as far as age goes. But Heir of the Empire, Dark Force Rising, Last Command, those are books that, because they were written when you were young and the expanded universe kept expanding at that point, you wouldn't necessarily have been acutely aware of it, especially if you were just getting into Star Wars. If your uncle was showing you the films and all that stuff, your concentration probably would have been on there for a while.
Definitely.
Right? And then eventually maybe the expanded universe. So I'm framing this in a way that I understand that, you're not going to be as versed in the expanded universe. I didn't actually mean that the way it came out. But still, there's still a conversation to be had there, because a lot of the content of it, the general storylines and all that stuff, even if you haven't read the books in great detail. And to be honest, there's still as many books of the expanded universe as I have read. There's an equal amount that I didn't read. And that's especially toward the end, because I knew, once the Yuuzhan Vong trilogy, or not trilogy, I wish it were a trilogy, the thing was like 21 books. Once I got through that, I mean, that took a while, man. It was cool, and I'm glad I did it, because it was hands down one of the greatest Star Wars stories. I mean, they could have streamlined that quite a bit. But I'm getting to all this because the question that I want to pose for us to answer, and of course all you guys that are watching, I mean, just because, this isn't live per se, it is a premiere, so you can all chat in and talk about it. Of course, leave your thoughts in the comments. And hey, while you're at it, hit that like button, hit the subscribe button too. But the question I want to pose to everybody is, okay, fine. She's influenced by the expanded universe. She's into this. She's read a million of the books. She's trying to bring that in. But the question is, there's not really a whole lot of expanded universe stuff that takes place during this time period. So how do you think that she intends to draw inspiration from it?
Well, I mean, you could bring in, um, I mean, you could bring in some things like the using Vong into that era
Yeah, you
because you
could.
still
So in other
do.
words, just transplant them basically. Kind of
Yeah,
like
you
what they
just
did
take.
with Thrawn in a way.
Yeah, you're just like, okay, well, we're just gonna bring because especially at that time when you don't have so the Sith are at this point in time, in Leslie's series, they're kind of under the radar. They're kind of under the surface, kind of trying to emerge here, and so you need like a threat, right? So in the High Republic, we had the Drengir, you had the Nile,
And
so
the
you
Nile are the
could
ones that are closest. Actually, the Nile remind me a lot of the
the
Yuuzhan
using
Vong.
Vong, right? So you could bring them in and kind of like do that, or you could take the Nile and use some of the using Vong stuff just with those particular, just with the Nile. Like you said, because they're so close, so you can bring some of that stuff in to like be the um antagonist to the Jedi at this time, especially when they're this is when they're at the zenith of their power, which would be interesting because it's like you have someone who is so powerful at that time as far as a Jedi at that moment, yet their powers don't work on this particular species. So what do you do? And that creates great storytelling because it's basically saying like, all right, Superman, fight these horrific things you know without the yellow sun. Good luck. It's just kind of like, well, all right, what does he do? So I think that you could do like a lot of different things like that. There's other, and like I said, there's things that she probably could just cherry pick, and it will go off with. It just depends on what story she's trying to tell within the acolyte.
Well, and I mean, I honestly think that what would have to happen is you would have to probably do something along the lines of, like you said earlier, bringing in Darth Plagueis, um,
Hmm.
perhaps even going back to Darth Bane, where he creates the rule of two.
Yep, holocrons, there's tons of stuff.
Yeah, I mean, there are Sith lore and stuff like that. Some of the things that maybe they started to explore in the sequel trilogy, maybe you can backtrack a little and give a little bit of a nod now. I mean, certainly because we know that Yoda's around during this time, you could do some stuff with him, perhaps. It's just going to be really
Hmm.
interesting to me because, I mean, this is an exciting announcement, don't get me wrong, because just like I said when we opened the show, look, it's about time that these showrunners, eventually even, I hope, the filmmakers themselves, like directors or whatever, writers, start to really look at and take seriously a lot of the things that happen in the expanded universe because, as you pointed out from what I said, probably, yeah, maybe it was the last show or the show before, there's so many great stories there. And
Hmm.
honestly, something that I've been saying over the course of a lot of shows when it comes up is the fact that you could very easily tweak everything because even though the old expanded universe is now Legends and technically the sequel trilogy takes the place of Heir to the Empire and all that stuff. The thing that's funny though is that you could actually take a lot of expanded universe stories almost verbatim and then tweak them a little bit and they would still perfectly fit this new canon, the whole new timeline that they created. I mean, you wouldn't really
Yeah.
even have to do it. In fact, you could even make Heir to the Empire and just make it with the new characters. Instead of Han, Luke, and Leia, it could be Finn, Poe, and Rey. And it
Hmm.
would you would have to adjust the storyline a little bit, but you could do it. I mean, I'm not saying that would be a good idea. I think it would be a better idea, which of course we did a whole show on it. Whereas if Disney Plus kind of made an alternate 7, 8, and 9, if they actually made either an animated or live action version of Heir to the Empire and said, okay, here's the 7, 8, and 9 from the books. And again, I mean, I hate to keep bringing Marvel into it, but Marvel's another Disney property and it's working. I mean, even with people arguably getting comic book movie fatigue, they're taking a lot of these series and they're expanding on a lot of themes, but they also have a lot of these almost what if type things. You know, of course, they bring in the multiverse. There's also the world between worlds, and you could just basically say, oh, well, you know, have some character go to the world between worlds and they spit out an heir to the Empire. I mean, there's a lot of ways that you could do this.
Yeah, I mean, the biggest thing that I really want to just really impress upon people is just that, you know, don't reinvent the wheel. You don't have to.
Yeah, exactly.
You know, it's just like I just feel like a lot of people who are getting their hands into Star Wars, and don't get me wrong, I'm not questioning their love or devotion for it. I mean, that's not my place.
There's sad devotion to this.
Right. However, I think that, you know, when it comes to the writing, the dialogue, like that's what people that's a big part of what Star Wars is. Like people really come for the story and the advancement and the development of characters. And when you're not developing characters that we can care about, or why should we care, you know, and they'll hear about it, you know, when we talk about, you know, our Obi-Wan reviews or things like that, you know, it's like, okay, well, especially when you have a situation where we know certain characters have to make it. Like, for example, even if you took the Acolyte and we put Yoda in the situation, well, we know you can't kill Yoda off because he pops up in Empire Strikes Back. So we know you're not getting rid of him. The thing is, though,
Well,
like,
but that depends. Not to interrupt you, but that does depend. You could pull a Maul or, you know, a Grand Inquisitor or something like that, right? And
but at least you
seemingly
still,
kill off Yoda. But no, you're right. I mean, you
yeah,
know,
you know,
even if you kill him
yeah,
on screen, you know he's coming back somehow. So the point does
yeah, you got,
stand.
yeah, but it's like, you know, he has to go on. So
Mm-hmm.
if you're going to do that, these new characters that you create around him, you have to make us care about them now. You have to make us really have that conviction and belief, you know, like, and feel that tension, you know, of danger, and make us feel like, man, I don't know how they're going to get out of this, or, you know, or I wonder if Yoda's going to save the day or what, or, you know, like how, you know, those are the things that we need to feel as fans when we're watching this, because that's what we felt when we were watching the original trilogy, you know, because we didn't know squat about these people. You know, we just had to care. I mean, of course, when you go start going back, okay, the prequels, all right, you know, certain people have to make it because they end up in future films. So we know you're not going to kill them off, or you can't really kill them off. But what are you going to do to now make us feel that tension? So that's the thing that I feel like in the expanded universe you can really do, is because you have so many different characters, you have so many great um situations where, you know, our heroes find themselves in, and, you know, now you can really bring that out. And like I said, especially for the fans who've been supportive over the years, but now for the fans who, you know, who are just kind of casually getting into it, you know, they'll kind of grow to find out like, oh, that came from this book, and this came from that game, and, you know, this came, and it's like, oh, okay, well, that's going to make people want to go back and like start reading some of this stuff, because it's like, you know, I want to know more. And that's how you grow Star Wars. That's how you gain, you know, fans. That's how you keep everything afloat, because now all fans are, for the most part, happy. But you just
Yeah.
got to do it right.
Well, and the thing is that other than specific storylines, one of the things that is cool about what they're doing, particularly in the publishing division where the books are concerned, they're starting to make these books. Oh, what's the latest one called? Something of the Sith. Boy, I really.
Well, I mean, in your
you could
defense,
tell.
man, there's so much stuff coming out, man. I mean, it's
Well, yeah, I mean, this is one though that's really cool. It's not the one I pre-ordered. I actually pre-ordered a Star Wars book recently, but this one is basically like you know, you had like the Legends of Luke Skywalker. This one's sort of like the Sith version, and it actually tells you a lot of the different things from the Sith perspective, and different different situations we've already seen, but from the Sith perspective, and a little bit more insight into the Palpatine-Vader relationship, which of course is always interesting to explore. You
Mm-hmm.
see a lot of this stuff in this new book. This is going to bother me. I could actually just
It's
look
about
it up,
the
actually.
what is the Shadow of the Sith or something
Yeah,
like that?
that's it. That's exactly it. Shadow of the Sith. That's what it's called. I mean, I
Mm-hmm.
knew it was something simple, too. Yeah, that's a really cool thing. And they're starting to do more of that. And what they're doing is they're reshaping the expanded universe into the new canon. Because one of the cool things that happened was the expanded universe was called that because they essentially expanded on or upon
Mm-hmm.
what Lucas had created. So you took at the time, we only even had the original trilogy, right? Because when the expanded universe started, there was like, I mean, the first prequel movie, Phantom Menace, came out in '99. So you had 8 good years of books that really only had the original trilogy. And yeah, I mean, I guess, Ewoks, those Ewok TV shows, um, and the the droid story thing, which by the way, they're bringing back and turning into a new thing.
Mm.
But the thing that I find interesting though is that now that you have all these stories in this new canon, they're almost doing a similar thing. It's almost like they're creating a brand new expanded universe. And they're
Mm.
not necessarily taking exact storylines and plot points and things like that from the old one, but what they're doing is they're now using the material that you have, say from the 3 Disney Plus shows we have, the 9 saga films, the 2 standalones. They're taking basically what they have now, but this time they're wisely including the comics, the games, the new canon books,
Mm.
and they're essentially using that as pretty much the foundation, and now they're expanding on that. So, in a sense, it's been quietly done, but they've created a new expanded universe. Now, you could, of course, argue that this new expanded universe is something they've been doing right from when A New Dawn came out, the very first new canon book, because technically speaking, all the books and comics and everything would actually be an expanded universe. All
Mm-hmm.
they did was say, hey, all those books and comics that came out from like 2011 and before, yeah, it doesn't count anymore. We're going to reboot the whole thing. And so they did. But what's interesting, though, is that they're taking, instead of writing these particular storylines that are influenced, or continuations, I should say, of a film or something like that, what they're doing is they're coming out with these, like the Legends of Luke Skywalker or Shadows of the Sith. And there's some other books like that too, where they're actually sort of expanding on different things and filling in gaps. And I can't help but think that maybe that's where the Acolyte's going to go. But what I do find interesting is how they keep saying that they're drawing directly from the old expanded universe and those books.
Well, like I said, there might be some legend things that might be going on that you could that they could speak to as to how certain things were shaped or formed. You
Yeah.
know, and I think that's where you can, like I said, some things are going to be, cherry picked, I believe, and then there are some plot points or massive chunks or plot points that may be adapted into a bigger storyline. That might serve or fit a particular thing. Um, what it kind of reminds me of is like Smallville,
Mm-hmm.
where they took a lot of the lore of Superman, but they kind of like refashioned it in a way to make it a little bit more sensible, or it makes certain things make more sense, um, and give it a different spin, a different look, and add to the story. So it's not just like, okay, one day he was a baby, and then like, 18, he puts on the red, blue suit and a cape, and he's
Well,
flying all over the place. Like,
it's
you're
no
getting
different
this
than
progression.
Yeah, but it's no
of
different,
stuff.
in my opinion anyway, of what they're doing with a lot of these TV shows, right? Because what Smallville did was, it's like, okay, we all know the origin of Superman. He's a
Mm-hmm.
baby, you know, flies to
Mm-hmm.
Earth. Yeah, he's adopted by the Kents, grows up, goes to Smallville High, blah blah blah, whatever, and then he's off. So all they're doing is they're
Mm-hmm.
filling in the gaps. Like, hey, well, what kind of challenges would the Kents have had with this new kid?
Mm-hmm.
What kind of challenges and obstacles and things would Clark have to overcome? Like that whole story, which I think was in the first
Yeah.
season, about he wanted to join the football team and, and John wouldn't let him because it's like, dude, yeah, you can't do that.
Yeah, do that. Yeah, man.
The first time you tackle somebody and kill them, there's going to be questions. You know, when you
Yeah.
throw that football, like, 5 cities over, I mean, we might have to answer some questions. And the thing that made that so compelling was the humanity of the disappointment that this kid had because he couldn't do the normal things because of some extraordinary powers he didn't even ask for.
Yeah, or let alone control. And that's what I'm saying. Like, I think, but they kind of, once again, they kind of expanded the
Mm-hmm.
lore, like, because, like, when he would go to see these different scientists, albeit, Christopher Reeve, when he found that cave and they had all those Kryptonian writings on it, like all these different things, like, oh, well, the Kryptonians had been here before, and they kind of knew just all these different things that people have done to expand the lore in the universe of Superman. It's been like really cool, and I think they could do the same thing with Star Wars.
Oh, absolutely. And in fact, I mean, one great example from Smallville, the Chloe character was a non-canon. I mean, that character, Allison Mack's problems with the law aside, um, her character though was a creation specifically for the Smallville series. Didn't exist anywhere outside of that. Well, then guess what? All the Superman comics started featuring Chloe. They actually canonized the character because it was a good character. So that kind of thing can happen in Star Wars too, to where, you invent, and look, it happens constantly, right? I mean, we're getting new characters in The Mandalorian or Book of Boba Fett or even Obi-Wan. And now
Well,
they're
yeah, I
all
mean,
canon.
like, yeah, just like me, like, before then, I never knew about like a Lionel Luthor like that. I mean, we started to see more about his dad and how Lex became the guy that he is
Mm-hmm.
because of his father. He has a sister, that's featured on the Supergirl series, so that's a whole thing, it's like, oh, okay, well, here's more, you know, into it. And,
Well, and don't
you
forget
know,
that concept was actually done on Smallville too, because it was what's her face,
yeah.
Cassidy. It's like my memory's gone today. It's hilarious. Um, but yeah, they featured Lex's sister, and it's true. It was almost like Lex was really trying to be a cool guy, and in fact, I remember being really disappointed because my favorite episodes where Clark and Chloe and all them would run into trouble, and Lex would bail him out. Lex would use his money
Hmm.
and his power and his influence to actually help him out. He's all hanging out with him at the talent and stuff.
Yeah.
It was almost like that before he got too suspicious and things were kind of weird,
Hmm.
and Lex ended up buying the talent to save it and all that. I mean, that time where he was he was obviously older, so but he was still kind of part of their group a little bit. To me, I was really bummed when you knew that he had to turn into Bad Lex, which, by the way, is how the character had been written for something like 70 years. One series put Lex in such a way that you're like, man, I never really want him to turn bad. This is actually kind of cool. It's kind of
Yeah,
the
and as
same
I
way
said,
with Anakin and Obi-Wan during the Clone Wars. You're like, oh man, does he have to be Vader?
yeah. And it's just like, once again, it's that perspective. It's like you don't see it, and then the way that something is explained to you is a little bit in a manner where it's like, oh man, like you said, it sucks because really Lex was just trying to be cool, and he just wanted Clark to tell him the truth, and he would have helped him and kept him protected.
Yep.
But Clark kept lying to him because he felt like he had to, and
Yep.
that just kept pushing Lex over the edge because of all the other things that he was dealing with his family, and he felt like he couldn't trust people, and
And that's
his best
true.
friend basically just, so you start to see that that perspective of like why this person went evil. It's not just they're just evil,
Well, and
So
that's
the
a good
same
point
thing
that you
for
bring up too, because
Anakin.
Lionel would have turned bad. I mean, well, Lionel was bad.
Yeah.
I mean, he was good there for a little bit, but you're probably right in the sense of if Clark had just been up front with Lex, Lex probably would have done everything in his power to protect him.
Hmm.
So it's kind of too bad, and they could do the same thing with Star Wars and specifically the Acolyte. But what I'm really hoping happens with this, and again, this I no longer think this is wishful thinking, just based on everything we're reading about this. I hope that this represents the new template of what Star Wars is going to do moving forward.
Hmm.
That's my hope.
Absolutely.
Because, the
I'm with you.
Acolyte, they could do a lot of it. I guess we'll just have to wait and see because, where it's sitting in the timeline makes me wonder how they're going to achieve that. But hey, listen,
Well,
you got a showrunner that's read probably more of the expanded universe than I have. So,
like I always say, it's and this is unfortunately the point I've gotten to, with Star Wars. Until they can consistently knock it out of the park, it sounds good. I'm with the idea and the concept. It's just the execution. I have to see how it's executed because there's a lot of things that start off really well, and then it's like the Goof Troop show all of a sudden, and then they try to wrangle it in right at the very end, or they try to, you know, do whatever, and it's just kind of like, this has the potential to being something amazing. Why didn't you just do the? And what's crazy is just like we're fans, like, we're not, we're not film students, we're not, what I mean? It's just like, but we can just, it's just simple things. And I feel like a lot of times they're thinking too hard, they're trying to do too much. And you have to really put yourself once again in the mind of George Lucas. George Lucas wasn't really trying to reinvent the wheel here when he made Star Wars. He really wasn't trying to be revolutionary or something to that degree. I mean, as far as the technology and stuff, yeah.
right, but
But
just
I
the
mean, like,
opposite. He was
but the
combining
storytelling of it,
classic, it was all these classic
classic
storytelling
storytelling.
things. I mean, from classic storytellers and basically, I mean, here's the funny thing, and this bears repeating. The whole reason why Star Wars was made is because he couldn't get the rights to Flash Gordon.
Exactly.
He grew up watching the Flash Gordon series. Dino De Laurentiis basically beat him to the punch. He lost out on because he wanted to make a Flash Gordon movie. Well, when he lost the rights, his whole thing was like, well, okay, fine, I'll just make something that's kind of in the spirit of that movie, and that's Star Wars.
Exactly. And that's my whole point. Like he wasn't overthinking it. It's just it was already a template that was already done. Once again, the story that was already taking place. Flash Gordon already existed. He just did something in the spirit of it. Okay. Well, you want to create more Star Wars stuff? You got books out here. Do it in the spirit of that. Like it's there. Like just use it.
Yeah, I know. It's like these authors have already come up with something. That's something I've been saying. But here's the other thing, just going to this previous point, because the book thing was a good point too. So, when you say that, right, that he wasn't
Hmm.
overthinking it or whatever, the big thing, honestly, he wasn't trying to live up to Star Wars. See, that's what the problem. The good thing about
Hmm.
fans making these movies is the fact that that they love the property and they're going to really try to do something cool. But what's ruining almost anything, maybe not completely ruining it, but preventing it from being better than what it is the fact they're trying to live up to Star Wars. They're trying to create, they're that goes into the whole overthinking of it. They're deifying
Yeah.
it.
Yeah. It's um. It's kind of like when you have somebody that's a famous entertainer, like a musician, or like Michael Jackson's kid or Michael Jordan's child or something like that. Like everybody expects them to live up to what their parent did. It's like, oh well, you know, oh you like to sing and dance. Well, I wonder if he's going to be as good as his dad. And it's
Mm-hmm.
like instead of like, okay. yes, my dad is who he was, and yeah, I get it. But you still kind of have to create. You can create your own lane, and like I'll just use Michael Jackson for example. You don't have to be the next king of pop. Be the king of R&B. Be the king of, or create another completely different genre or something like that. That's your own or
Or
whatever, and
just be good.
just be good. Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Like you don't have to be.
See, that's what I'm
necessarily
saying. It's
like
kind of
the.
like using the Michael Jackson thing as an example. Another great one, more from the rock world, is Wolfgang Van Halen's got to live up to his dad,
Mhm.
And the problem is that he wisely, just kind of followed his own path or whatever. But it's kind of like, look, you don't have to be some legendary musician. Just be good. Just be who you are,
Mhm.
And the thing is that when George Lucas created Star Wars, even when he was doing Empire and all that, he wasn't trying to follow it up. He didn't care about all that stuff. He
Mhm.
was just trying to tell the story he wanted to tell. He didn't even care how successful it was. And I think that that's the problem, especially when Disney got a hold of it, is that they're more focused on how successful is it. We got to create something that's successful. We got to market it. Lucas never cared about that. And I think that that's the component that really is the key to all the problems that they're having right now. Is it we're kind of like what you said, they're trying too hard. Well, that's why they're trying too hard, because Star Wars has this legendary money-making thing. That's why they bought it. I mean, I get
Status.
it. They paid $4 billion for it. They kind of want to make that money back and earn a little coin
Mhm.
on, in addition to that. But that'll come. That'll all come. Just
If you make good stuff.
make Star Wars what it is. Don't worry about, its
Mhm.
marketability. Don't try to shoehorn all these things that are going to appeal to today's society. Make
Mhm.
it timeless, make it good storytelling. And just to kind of bring this into what we've been talking about here, I mean, you got a million really good stories out there. I'm waiting for, instead of drawing inspiration from it, how about adapting it?
Yeah.
Let's start adapting some of those expanded universe stories, or at the very least, if you
The
don't
new
really
canon
want to,
stuff.
yeah, do the new canon stuff, because then you don't have to tweak too much.
Yeah. Oh yeah, I'm totally with that.
Yeah. Well, but then again, there's what we think and there's what everybody else thinks. I'm curious on what everybody's been chatting in, though. That's throughout this conversation. I really am. But first of all, I want to thank anybody that has been chatting in. Of course, obviously, we love the chats. Hopefully, we were actually able to join you on this one, either one or both of us. But either way, let us know. You still have maybe 20, 30 seconds left in the chat. But definitely let us know in the comments section, what do you think we're going to see from the expanded universe in the Acolyte? That's the big question, I think, for this show. And of course, as always, if you like the content, you like what you see, hit that like button. Give us a little bit of support. Really does help the channel. Hit the subscribe button and then of course the notification bell, so you guys always know when we're coming out with something. Hey, we come live to you every Monday and every Friday night at 8. Well, sometimes. Technically, this is pre-recorded, but extenuating circumstances, that's the problem. And, Monday, there's no mystery about what we're going to be talking about Monday.
Not one bit.
Nope. It was released 2 days ago on Wednesday. We have the season finale, could be series, but who knows? The way that this whole Obi-Wan thing has been going now,
Yeah.
even the actors have been clamoring for a season 2. So, they might announce, hey, we might be getting a season 2. So I hesitate to call it the series finale, but we definitely got the season finale of Obi-Wan. Of course, every YouTuber in the world's been talking about it and will through the weekend. But you guys are going to want to hear what we have to say about it Monday night, 8 o'clock. We'll see you guys there. And with that, hopefully you guys have a good rest of your weekend. I'm Eric Vansel.
I'm Daryl Sanders.
May the Force be with you.
Always.
Head to Head, a Star Wars podcast. Be sure to follow us on Twitter at head-to-head-SW. Submit your questions for our next show. Visit our official website at head-to-head-swpodcast.com. Until next time, may the Force be with you, always.